Look at that pink. But yeah, do you want to say who you are now? Because we did.
Sure. Do the introduction now.
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah. So Michael Woodward, and I am painter, artist, and I guess designer.
Yeah.
And sometimes of the day.
Yeah.
And I have my studio is called 8x8 Studio down here at the Art
Awesome.
Hub. I was telling you earlier today, like when COVID happened, it was like, okay, I was at home a lot more like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I had been down to, I always used to spend time in Barrio Logan since I've lived here. Because
Yeah.
I mean, when I lived in Tucson, I had a friend, he was a big foodie, and he told me, like, he found out we were moving to San Diego.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, do you know a saloon? And I'm like, no, because I, been here as a tourist.
Yeah.
And so since I moved here 6 years ago, I always came down here.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a cool discovery because I was like, oh, this is a great, like, area, and it was so full of like all the arts we used to come before COVID.
Yeah.
All the galleries and stuff. So it's one of those, like, when I started doing art, I was like manifested, like, you know what, I want to be down in this. And so a good friend of mine and I, we'd always come down here to all the openings and everything. And I joked, I'm like, you know what, I need to have a gallery, not gallery, but a
space.
studio here
Yeah.
someday. Like, never thinking, and this was before I, was doing art. Like, I don't know what I need to do.
Yeah.
And it's like manifesting that. But coming down here last year, it was happenstance that luck worked because like they had an opening at the Art Hub, and I was like, no, I really don't need to do it. And I did, and it's probably the best thing because every day I'm down here, I'm surrounded by people who are like, very inspiring.
Yeah.
And just they're following their passion. Like they're doing it every day. So it kind of helps motivate, like, okay, stop doing it in your yard. You may be able to do something.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
And it's awesome because it's like you have awesome neighbors there too.
Yeah.
But it's like I've always liked the feeling of seeing your neighbor, and I'm like, what are you up to?
Yeah.
And then you're like, I'm working on like this painting that's gonna be hung up at this place, and then do
Yeah.
this, or just I'm working on this painting that has a lot of this and this and so just the whole idea that people had stuff going on all the time, to
Yeah.
me I was like, I'm with my people. Like you get
Exactly.
it. Like
Yeah.
I have shit going on too, so it's like that was like, oh my God, there's that like creative energy constantly
it's totally
flowing.
inspiring too.
Yes.
It's like people are doing what they love and they're making it happen, and that's been like the big thing for me this last year is like, oh, okay, instead of just doing this for fun, like for me, like everybody's like, oh, you need to put a website up, and for me it was a conscious thing in the beginning of like, no, I'm just doing this because I would post some stuff on Facebook, and then people would reach out to me, and then it's funny because my Instagram for a long time was just for me and like, personal stuff, and I just started dipping my toes into like putting my art out there a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And it was kind of crazy because I'm like, oh, I just do it. Like a lot of my paintings I just would make, and I was giving them away.
Yeah.
And somebody was like, and it was funny because I guess I was at that point of like never thinking like, oh, somebody actually might want to buy this.
Yeah.
And just some random stranger like text me and was like, oh, I'd love to buy your painting. And the funny thing was one that I was like, I really, that was personal. Like it was one I made for me.
Yeah.
Like I made it, and I'm like, oh, okay. And Rich is like, well, yeah, why wouldn't you sell it? I'm like, well, I don't know. I never thought of it as something to sell.
Yeah.
I just thought of it as,
therapeutic and
like art therapy, really. And like, okay, throw some paint around and have fun.
Yeah.
And I did. I had a really good instructor at Art in 30th, and she was great. And like, this is what I did and how I've got there. And so I have that inspiration from other people.
That's so cool.
How to make it into something bigger than what it is.
So now do you like sell the paintings, or are you still kind of like
dip my toes in? Like, it's funny. I have a commission that a friend of mine's like, oh, I want you to do it. So I've been working on that. And I kind of put it back burner when I moved the studio space. This week I'm off for my day job.
Yes.
So like, all right, one of my things is, okay, creating like inventory, like enough art to actually sell, to have out there. Cause like I'll do something.
That
I'll
is
be like,
awesome.
oh, okay, I'm bored, and I'll make something new. But to really, start doing something that, okay, I could sell this and give it, people, there's an audience for it. And it's funny because I'll post stuff, and I started like when I, started the space, when I first had the space here, it was one of the little tiny ones. And then when Chris expanded the building this year, I had told him like, oh, I'd love a, a bigger space. So where I moved, and then people were like, oh, you have a bigger space, you should have a gallery space. I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. And I did. I had an open studio a few months ago, which was fun, and I was shocked. It was shocking to me because I didn't really do any work and I didn't advertise it. I was just like, oh, okay. And I kind of put it out there, and I was blown away like how many people actually came through and were like, oh, I follow you on Instagram. Like, what? Like, okay, those, people are actually people.
People are actually like looking at my stuff.
Yeah, like it was kind of surreal moment of like, oh, okay. And then people like wanting to. So kind of like in that space of like, okay, I need to take it to that next level. And that's where when I moved spaces and people were like, oh, well, is it just Michael Woodward art? I wanted to create something now where I could have something that I can build off of. So that's where, to like homage of my original studio space, I created the 8x8 studio, which is for me. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
To kind of give it a brand, like, okay, that's a space, because I wanted it to be just more than, oh, Michael creates art, but like somewhere like if I create stuff and like a creative home for everything that I do. So like
that's
design
awesome.
And so it's kind of funny. I'm kind of gone full circle of like, okay, doing painting, of like looking more at like design again, which always has helped me like with the colors and like layout and stuff. It's funny, all that stuff that you learn that you think you just kind of tabled and will never use again, it's like oh yeah, no, I need to do that because that person looks this way, and this is what somebody's looking at when they're looking at a painting, and this is the colors that draw somebody in, like we were talking about the pink color for Loka. So
it's all like the psychology behind the colors and this and that. But dude, I love, like when I started like following you and doing all that kind of stuff, I was like, whoa, this looks really cool, because you were doing a lot of the collaging stuff. And I saw the sewing pattern one, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I love that you just use all kinds of different things that some people would be like, well, why would you use that? And why, like it's not stuff that's safe, and I love that. Like, it's like really just doing whatever you want to do with your
and there's
work.
So much raw material out there that we throw away. Like, our society has gotten so much, like we were talking about, like fast fashion and just art. Like, it's funny because I had somebody come through my studio space on Open Studio, and she was like, oh, how much is for that one? And I don't know, like I don't have a total price guide, and that's one thing I've started to have to look at, like, okay, how do you price your art? And I was just threw a number out because I'm like, okay, this is how much time it took me, and I was like, $200. She's like, oh, well, I could buy something at Target for $200. Well, sweetie, knock yourself out. Go to Target. Buy something for $200. But there's such a throwaway mentality, and we have so much stuff out there. So like, I love like, okay, recycling stuff.
Like
I have a place where I go, I can get like wood and like build it out and make like canvas, because I'm like, okay, I could go spend $150 for this canvas, which is great. But like, why not try to paint on something? And then I love like collaging stuff and taking other stuff and re-imaging it and sanding it down. That was funny thing is when we had our class on Art on 30th, Anne had this huge canvas and she took a sander to it, and I'm like, oh, you can sand a painting? Like, I never would have thought to do that.
She's like, you could do anything you want.
And so like sanding it and getting the different texture. So like you paint it because it's acrylic. Like I work in acrylics and never dabbled really in oil just because it's so like there's so much a long drying time that I like the quick, like, okay, you can paint something and
dry,
sand it down. And I'm such a perfectionist. I think moving from graphics design and then moving to painting, that's one thing I've had to release, which that's why I kind of gravitated towards abstract originally, is I can kind of like throw the paint around and be like, oh, okay. And I've noticed, and I have to watch myself, I'm like, oh, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, Michael. This is not, it's a painting. So.
And I love that. Like, I love rawness in any kind of, like project where it's like sewing or it's like art or anything like that, because it's like, I feel like there's no like representation where like it's like the middle ground of things, where it's like, look, there has to be like some kind of like evolution with things. So being able to see it like, hey, look, and obviously I feel like the social medias are like awesome in that sense, where it's like you could go back and look at your stuff and be like, damn, I was doing some shitty ass work. Look at me now, But it is like it's one
kind
of those
evolutionary
things,
process
where you see it and then you're like, oh well, and you start to see like the technique kind of change, or it's inspired by something different, and so I love that, like, now you're doing the portraits,
and
which is really cool.
Thanks. And
I
that's
love
something
those.
I was like, wanted to challenge myself more because I was doing a lot of more abstract, and I was like, well, so much. I wanted to move more, not into realism, because I just my artistic ability. And I think that's why I always did graphic design, because I'm like, okay, it's graphics. And I was never, I mean, I can draw. Like, I know if I did it more, which obviously now I've been doing more drawing, but it was a challenge thing. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this. Yeah. And I'm going to draw it and see what it looks like and if I like it and incorporate it. So yeah, I've started doing that, which is kind of fun. And it's been a nice like surprise. I think if anything, I'm like, oh, okay, that doesn't look half bad. Yeah. And that's my thing. I know I'm the worst critic of myself, because I'll be like, oh, I don't like that. Yeah. And I'll post something. Sometimes it's funny. I'll post something because I like to post, like you said, to see the evolution. Yeah. And so I'll post something and I'll be like, damn, somebody actually likes that. Like, I just posted it because I wanted to see what I was doing for my process. You know, like, and I'll take a picture.
Really like it, huh?
And I'm like, oh, okay. But it's nice. And I've kind of learned from that of like, okay, I need to do that to hold myself accountable. Yes. Because I've gone through all my stuff and I'm like, oh, you know, why did I just abandon this? Like, oh, okay, like leave it by the wayside and let life get in the way. Yeah. And like, oh, okay, no, keep doing it. Yeah. So that's it. Like doing the portraits has been a fun way to kind of do it. And that's where I said it's funny. I've kind of been almost full circle, is because like I was noticing lately a friend of mine was working and they did zines, which cracks me up that it's coming full circle, because I think people, especially during COVID, have gotten more what I call, what people call, and I definitely see it as more analog, of like drawing and not doing the digital stuff. And so zines, which when I was in high school, I mean, before we had the advent of, you know, computers, that's how we would be creative. Like we'd make little magazines. So I was like, oh, maybe I should get back into, you know, trying that. Yeah. And it's just like, I had no idea. I started researching. I'm like, they have a whole like festival and like
it's coming up.
Yeah, it's like crazy. Yeah. Like, oh, wow. So it's funny how things, you know, come full circle. Yeah. So yeah, so doing that, I was like, oh, well, to kind of challenge myself and get more back in and bring more of my design skill set back. Yeah. Like topography and layout and everything. So.
Oh, that's so fun. Yeah. And you know what? It's like really utilizing like those skills that you've had, that you're like, well, I should kind of like mess around with that and see like what happens.
Because why not?
Yeah, because why not? Like, I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Like, nothing. Like, you're just going to make this really cool, like, you know, piece of artwork, you know. But it's really interesting that like now you're in the art hub and like now you have like your space, and your space is like really beautiful and inviting. So you have like plants on like the, you know, your windowsill, and like you have like a window. A lot of the people don't have windows, and it makes it nice. That was
my big thing when Chris was renovating. I'm like, do you have anything that has a window? And he was awesome, because he was like, oh yeah, I have one space that's, you know, that I have, if you want to, you know, look at it. And he, you know, held it for me, and I was like waffling back and forth. Oh, do I really need this space? And it was probably the best decision, because it's, you know, like I said, it pushed me to, okay, you're investing in it, of like the money and the time, but just having the space of my own, of like, okay, I can go there. It's creative. I try to be really good, because I work remotely. Yeah. To not bring my work, because I could easily just be like, okay, you know, I'm going to come down at 8 o'clock in the morning and work. But I know myself, if I do that, I'll be like, oh, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm still doing my job and not being creative. Yeah. So that's where moving to that bigger studio has been good, because it allows me to have more space. Yeah, the window has been awesome, because that building get really hot during the
I heard
summertime.
I heard.
So having the space there and just the natural light, because that was the worst thing. Like my other studio, the first space, you know, it was very artificial, and then I'd bring a painting home, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that looks totally than what I expected it to look like, because in the natural light, it's so much brighter. I'm like, whoa, okay.
You're like, what happened? That's why I put on makeup in natural light, because then you go outside and you're like, whoa, what happened?
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of eyeliner. But, you know, seriously, I love having you as a neighbor. Like, I feel like your energy is always like really awesome. Oh, thanks. And like, you know, I've always been like a huge fan of like your artwork, and I'm really excited that you're making inventory, you know, and like I feel because a lot of people, like even like just stickers and all that kind of stuff, like people just love that, you know. And so what do you plan to do with like the space, and are you wanting to do more like gallery like stuff?
I think and it's been good from the fact that COVID, because before COVID happened, and people were like, oh, you need to do this and this, and it was a pressure like, okay, get into some shows and do that. And you know, right before COVID, I'd put a painting at a show at Art on 30th. You know, it was a juried show, and they had it there, and it was so funny because first time I'd really entered a show, and people were like, "Oh, I love it," and people were talking to me, and then COVID happened, kind of sidelined it. So I've just been taking the time to really figure out, like, okay, and using the studio.
Yeah.
So now, one thing I'm working on is definitely getting a website and kind of making and looking at it of like, okay, how to take that art and put it more out there for the masses. Because the one thing that always has driven me nuts about art is it's gotten so monetized to the point of like, okay, yeah, I could sell a painting. I know how much it costs, but like somebody's not gonna, be able to afford it, because when a person gets to a certain level, it's like, oh, okay, it costs that much. Not that I'm there, but what I see is like, oh yeah, somebody has to have $500 or $600. So trying to figure out a way of like, okay, making it so I can make art and it's affordable, but also accessible.
Yes.
So people can have it. That's why I like using recycled materials, because I don't feel bad. Like a friend of mine a few weeks ago was like, oh, I can't afford a piece of artwork. And I'm like, well, here, you can have this one. Like, what? You can have it. Like, yeah, because, okay, it was recycled stuff. I painted. I did it because I liked doing it.
Yeah.
And I want to be cognizant of that, because I've had, last year it was funny during COVID, I was posting more stuff because I was like, okay, just keep myself, really accountable, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm going to the studio, and I did the 100-day project, which
yes.
is the project where you do something for 100 days.
Yeah.
So I started, the first day of the project, did almost 100 days, and literally like the last 30 days of it is when, hey, okay, we're moving Art Hub. And so I kind of like had to end it, but the accountability was good because like every day I was posting stuff and the progress. But what was amazing, a gallery like approached me, which I never thought in 1,000 years like that would ever happen.
That's amazing.
But what was funny from it is they approached me and they were talking about like how the whole gallery thing works, and like, oh, we have so much, we take so much, which I understand and I can respect it because I have to make money. But I'm like, okay, so you want me to give you X amount of money to market it? Like, you just found me because I posted on Instagram, so I'll keep doing that. Because like one of my friends, like, they can't just go to a gallery and go pop it off the wall, because they're going to pay 25% on top of that price for them to get that. And we were talking back and forth, like, well, what would you price this at? Oh, we price it at this much. Well, how much am I getting? Oh, this much. So I could sell this directly to a friend of mine for that much money. Well, we're going to do that work for you. Where I'm like, okay, well, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing art to make it to sell. I mean, like, all respect, there's like big artists out there that make lots of money, but it's become a product. It's like, is it art anymore, or is it a product?
Yeah. And I feel like exactly that same kind of way too, where it's like, for me, like, I love sewing.
Yeah,
I love sewing. Like, I love doing like cutting and doing, like, putting it together and doing that kind of process. I don't want to write descriptions of like the item or like try to sell it to you. Like, I'm not a salesperson, I don't know what I am, but
you're the maker, and you want to.
I like that kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to be like, you need to buy it because it has like, this, and then you're just, So for me, like, that's like what I like to do. Yeah. So it's like, I want for the story to be able to like sell it and like tell and
people to have a response to it. Like,
exactly.
For me, like, going, like, when I had the open studio, like, it was just a fluke, and it was like everybody was like, oh, we're gonna have this big thing because we're opening the Art Hub, and so I wanted to support it. And then people had reached out to me because I'd been posting, because I try to be really collaborative and like really share, especially because I look at it this way, as like, I came in to this neighborhood as a visitor, and it's been turned into like a second home. Like, as I come down here, it's like everybody is so welcoming and creative. Like, okay, everybody is working really hard, like, to make it, especially in the economy we're living now. It's like very touch and go. We never know what's going on day to day.
True.
But everybody here has been like so welcoming and supportive. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm here, and I'm going to make sure that people know. So it was funny, just from sharing that stuff, like, people started asking, oh, are you going to be open that weekend? I'm like, oh, I hadn't really planned on it.
Yeah.
Then I did it, and people are like, oh, wow, you should do that more, which definitely, trying to have a full-time job and then do this, it's like, okay, one goes the other. So holding the accountability of like having the studio space and doing it, and so trying to move into that next level, I guess you will, this next year.
Do you ever want to, like, would you ever want to do it as like a full-time thing, or?
Oh, yeah. if I could pay my bills and do it,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's where I thought, like, with the 8x8 idea is coming from marketing, like,
Yeah.
you know, brand, like everybody's about, you know, like having a brand and following it. And there is that loyalty of like, people will follow it and they'll do it. Like you pivoted
Yeah.
and, you know, look at you and like, you're totally, I say this on camera, you're a total inspiration because it's like, you took it and took a time where it's like, it was very challenging and people could have just been like, fuck this and give up. And you're like, no,
Yeah.
this is what I'm going to do now.
Yeah.
And
well, I think it was like the awakening, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of
Yeah,
us
we were
had
talking about
that
earlier.
kind of
Yeah.
like waking up and just being like, whoa. To me, like I've always kind of like seen it as like, well, I could always go back if I wanted,
Yeah,
you know, but
exactly.
at the same time, I'm like, you know, I didn't realize how overly stressed I was and how it was just a lot. And
yeah,
like I
and
was
you don't realize how much it takes of your
yeah.
day.
Oh, it was like,
Yeah.
and so for me, like I was like, I loved this area because of like how much energy there was all the time, and I was like, oh my god, like I want to be a part of that energy, and I never had any kind of inventory or anything. Like I would just open up my studio, so people were like, oh, okay, cool. Like when they would have art crawls and stuff, and so. You know, there was like a lot of time alone. So I was like, I'm just going to make stuff because I need to sew in order to not have a fucking shit attack, you know?
Well, and tune it. I think once you start doing that and you put yourself out there and you allow your creative headspace, you allow yourself to be in that creative headspace, you can't get out of it. Like now, I used to be like, okay, okay, I did this. Like I walk away from it because I'm too focused on everything else. Where now my focus has changed of like, I have a job and I have that because I have to support myself and I have my bills and, you know, San Diego is not cheap.
Yeah.
But like my space is, you know what, this is the time I'm working and not letting the stress of the job take away. Like this week I'm off from work and I'm like yesterday I just like, oh, this is so nice to just hang out and
Get
go
used
to my
to
studio
it.
all day.
Get used to it.
Yeah. So like I think what I would love to do is like take that brand and turn it to where I didn't want to just be Michael Woodward art. I wanted to be like 8x8. So that way if I wanted to do something like you and I chat about, like, you know, taking the art and putting it on stuff, but not just being like an artist where, oh, I print a shirt and it has my art, but like how to have like more of a dialogue. Like I talk to people like, hey, if I put my art on this, would you buy it? And they're like, yeah, but really building something where it's like, okay, like a messenger bag that has like, I started doing a couple of years ago, I had taken a lino cutting class, printmaking class over here
super
at
cool.
Bread and Salt.
Nice.
And really loved it because I had done that in high school. And so like I want to take like some of my lino cut stuff that I've been using in my paintings. Because when I was doing the 100-day project last year, a lot of people were like, oh my God, I really love that. Because what I was doing is literally was creating something to then use it in the painting as an element, but taking that and putting it on stuff. Like somebody was like, oh, and I hadn't even thought of this. They're like, you should embroider that and put it on a hat. And I'm like, what?
You're like, great idea.
I'm like,
do you have any more? You're like writing them down.
And I was like, oh, okay. And it was things like that I'm like, I didn't think of it from that angle because I've been such a space of like, okay, I'm just doing it for fun. It's a stress reliever. To now being here and like walking through the neighborhood every weekend and being here and seeing people really do it, you know, like, okay, this is what they're doing every day. Like, oh, okay, maybe I could do that. So kind of seeing where I could go next.
And you definitely can. You know, because I feel like it just takes that little kind of like push, and then you've done it so many times where you like you're like, I'm gonna quit my job and I don't have anything lined up, and you know, and so
it is that big nest, jump out of the nest and be like, oh, what did I just do?
You're like, I'll fly, right? And like, but you know, it is one of those things where it's like sometimes it's like those little risks that you're just kind of like, oh, well, I'm just gonna do that, and then you end up doing it.
And that support system too, like knowing that you can do it. And that's been the biggest thing for me is like doing it and like finally moving out of my yard. Like it was so funny. Like when I first came down here last year, I was there, and because it was COVID, everything was happening, I would come down and just shut the door. And then as things started opening up, people were getting vaccinated, and you like felt more like, okay, opening it up, people were coming like, oh wow, this is what you're doing in here, because it was like I wasn't always there. I was usually there in the evenings.
Yeah.
So it's been really great to have that community as well, and like that encouragement.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, there's some of my neighbors who are like, you need to do this. Like, okay.
You're like, fine, I will do it. Like Jen, she's been like,
oh yeah,
you know,
she's awesome.
Yeah.
And she's been a good push, and
Yeah.
she's like, I think the mother of our art studio. Hey Jen, I'm talking about you.
But you know what? Like, I'm really so excited that you took time to like come and like just chit chat, because
It's been fun.
seriously, like, I think you're so amazing. Like, I feel like your paintings like really like they called to me, because I'm like, my brain looks like that. There's a lot going on.
Well, that's usually
know?
like my brain, because that's I just paint whatever like comes to me. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just paint this today.
Yeah.
So
And it's awesome, and I love it, and I've always loved your energy,
you.
and like I feel like you're such a great addition to like the hub, and I know that there's like a lot of really awesome things to come for you,
Oh, thanks.
so yeah, no, you're good. Thank you. And I appreciate you coming and taking time and all that. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
And there's so much work that goes into making this.
I know. Look at all these cameras, and I feel like paparazzi. Like, look at these lights.
Exactly.
But thank you. I really appreciate you coming.
This is fun, and this is great. So
yeah.
appreciate it.
Mic drop.